Thank you, President Johnson. If it is okay with the board, we felt like because tonight is the night of our second public hearing that we would have Ms. Minnick join us for a brief review of what we considered last week. Does that sound okay?
That sounds perfect.
Very good. Just a reminder, trustees, you are required by law to pass a balanced budget by the 30th day of June of each year. We have worked on the budget, and I appreciate the diligent work of the Finance Committee led by Trustee Gaynor. We work on the budget 365 days a year, and every month come to the board with monthly updates. We receive input and feedback from our community throughout all of those times. And yet, as we move toward the adoption of the annual budget, we do hold 2 public hearings. So tonight will be the second of those public hearings. Ms. Minnick, I know that this will make the third or fourth time for some of our trustees that they have reviewed the details of both our amendment to wrap up this past year that we are finishing, and also the proposed budget for school year 21-22. Would you please review those items briefly for the board, and then we'll move forward, President Johnson, with questions and in the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swift. Good evening, trustees. I'm pleased to provide a second briefing on the amended general fund budget for the 2020-2021 school year and the proposed general fund budget for the 21-22 school year. As Dr. Swift mentioned, there have been no changes since last week's first briefing, but let's take a look at the amended budget and the most significant changes by section, as we did in the first briefing last week. So taking a look at our revenues, we can see the most significant changes are in the state source and federal source line items. So let's take a look at those highlights and those most significant changes. And those are a result of our foundation allowance. In our original budget, we had anticipated a $700 per pupil reduction, but in fact, that foundation allowance stayed flat. And on top of that, we did receive an unanticipated $65 per pupil one-time funding source. And in the Ann Arbor Public Schools, as we saw statewide, several public schools saw enrollment declines as a result of the pandemic, and that did result in a reduction of our revenues as well. Taking a look at the federal revenue highlights, the most significant changes to our revenue include the fact that we saw the first round of ESSER monies in the amount of $1.3 million and 2 sources of coronavirus relief funds in the amount of $6.3 million and about $221,000. Now to the expenditure side of the ledger, those most significant amendments actually impact most every line item in those categories on the budget template that we saw. The format of our budget, every line item was staffing needs and COVID-19 supports, whether grant funded or not grant funded. They were significant supports in order to continue the support and instruction for the students of the Ann Arbor Public Schools. So now let's take a look at how those revenues affect our fund balance. And we can see here that the revenue over expenditures is anticipated to be about $449,000. And when we add that to our audited beginning fund balance of $19.7 million, the projected ending fund balance for the year is about $20.2 million. And that is equivalent to about 7.4% of revenues and about 7.4% of expenditures. And again, our ending fund balance is anticipated to be about $20.2 million. So turning now to the 2021-22 proposed general fund budget overview. And we will take a look at this budget again, section by section, as we did for the amended budget. And recall that the budget is a plan. It is a plan for allocating our anticipated resources. And as Dr. Swift mentioned, I just want to remind everyone that the board is required to adopt this budget or a 2021-2022 budget by June 30. So even without knowing all factors, such as enrollment or funding, reasonable assumptions must be made. So looking at the revenues then, again, those significant changes are in the state and federal sources. And the highlights there include changes again to our foundation allowance. We anticipate that we will see a $50 per pupil increase, and that is based on the House proposal. We also anticipate that our enrollment will be equivalent to our February 2021 count, so a flat enrollment. And this year, the student counts will be blended at 90% fall and 10% prior spring. So there will be no super blend. If you recall last year, this current school year, the student counts were blended so as to soften revenue reductions as a result of those enrollment declines. But we return to an anticipated traditional blend of students next year, and that will result in a reduction of our revenues for next year. And of course, we have to eliminate any one-time per pupil funding from our budget that we saw this year in an amount of about $1.2 million. On the federal revenue side, again, we have to eliminate one-time grant funding as well. So those two sources of coronavirus relief funds and the ESSER 1 monies that we will be amending our budget for this school year. We also need to add the released one-time grant funds that have been released to date, and that is the 43.6% of the ESSER 2 monies in an amount of about $2.8 million. So turning next then to the expenditure side of next year's proposed budget. The most significant changes are the fact that we will be full day, 5 days a week in-person instruction. So these expenditures include all anticipated costs that way, and we will be offering our A2V secondary and our A2 virtual, A2V live elementary offerings. And the expenditures include all employee group and collective bargain agreement salaries, healthcare, attrition, retirement costs. And I do want to clarify that I was able to confirm the average retirement rate for Ann Arbor Public Schools, and that rate is anticipated to be 43.9% next year. And that is comprised of a base retirement rate of 28.85%, and we layer in then that unfunded actuarial accounting liability percent of 15.05. And that's how we arrive at a 43.9% average retirement rate in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. And then, of course, we anticipate continuing COVID-19 supports, whether they are grant funded or not. They may be continued expenditures. We may incur new ones. Of course, we will monitor the health and safety and the environment in the fall as we go through the school year. So the effect of those revenues and anticipated expenditures for next fiscal year, let's take a closer look at that on the next screen. We anticipate a projected ending fund balance of $13.5 million as a result of those revenues and expenditures. And that fund balance is equivalent to 5.1% of revenues and 5% of expenditures. And so that leads us to our next steps. We will continue to monitor developments throughout the coming days, weeks, across the summer and fall. And we will keep an eye on our assumptions and how they are faring against what becomes known. And we will keep you informed about those developments and continue with our monthly monitoring reports and recommend any changes as necessary as we go through the school year. And I'm happy to take any questions you may have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Gaynor.
Thank you. Two questions. The first one may be for Dr. Swift. For the 2021 budget, the costs for additional staffing was, I think, $5.9 million. Can you explain the reason? That seems a really high unbudgeted expense.
Yes, thank you, Trustee Gaynor. shared, as we showed last week, all of the efforts that were COVID related. And we just went through everything from testing, COVID testing, all the way to opening 2 virtual programs at elementary, all the way to, ensuring our contact tracing efforts. So those staffing numbers really go through every area. It is both additional staff for our virtual programs, and it is also additional duty for many staff members who created summer programming. Our summer programming was double its normal size last summer, and rewriting curricula. So it really permeates across the system, both in some additional staff, not a ton, but some additional nurses and those kinds of staff opening 2 virtual programs, but also in additional duty work tasks for the staff that we have had. Ms. Minnick, that's my general look at why that number seems much larger than usual. And the question we've discussed, trustees, as you well know, is how much of that do we expect to recede now as we're moving back to full operations? And we'll continue to be analyzing that over this summer. But what would you add, Ms. Minnick, to that response?
Yes, thank you for that question, Trustee Gaynor, and thank you, Dr. Swift, for your comments. I would only add that if we were to look back at this time last year, the budget that was adopted anticipated reduced expenditures for some reductions. However, we did not see enrollment decline in areas that we anticipated, and it did not allow for certain savings that we were anticipating. So that is added on into those additional staffing costs. And they may not have been added staff, but rather staff that we anticipated maybe not having to replace, but indeed we did. So,
hey, I don't want to put you on the spot now, but can we get a breakdown of this? I happen to be talking to a board member from, probably 20 years ago. He mentioned that they got a personnel report every week, or maybe it was every meeting, I don't know. But I would like to be able to monitor staffing with this. So just, as a suggestion now, again, not putting you on the spot, but yeah, I realize we don't have, except for the annual staffing reports, we don't have a feel for that, or I don't have a feeling for that. So
I appreciate that question, Trustee Gaynor, and we'll discuss with Ms. Minnick. We're very transparent, and I've updated the board with any and all staff that we've added. I think we've discussed it a lot this past year, is that scaling up 2 programs on the return to in-school learning was significant. Ensuring substitute teachers in every building that were trained in Schoology and ready to assist in a virtual environment, attending to special needs services that in doing those recovery services. And so certainly there are staffing reports that will show the number of staff, and we do update the board on the number of staff, but I want to share that this is a combination of many staff doing much more work. And by that, I mean hourly staff who are paid more by the amount of hours they work. It's a combination of that and some additional staff, which you are all well aware of, the additional nurses, the additional A2 virtual and other virtual supports, additional services through special education. I mean, we've just been climbing a very steep hill, but I'm fine to send you year over year the total number of staff, but beware that won't show the full picture as you've indicated, Trustee Gaynor.
Yeah, I just want some clarity, some numbers. So thank you for that. My second question, and maybe Ms. Minnick can answer it. She stays on top of it. The Senate passed a bill to release much of the federal money that's been held up. I don't know if it's gone all the way through back to the House and reconciled and signed. I don't think it has been, but do you have any updates on that or amounts it would mean to Ann Arbor as it seems to currently stand? I know we can't count on anything that we don't have in hand. And I know it's one-time money, which is an important consideration. Is there anything you can add? Yeah.
Thank you, Trustee Gaynor, for that question. And you are correct. It's anticipated to be one-time grant funding. And as you stated, I'm not aware that it has gone through the entire process and back through to the governor's desk. But the intent of the bill, House Bill 4421, the intent is to release the remainder of the ESSER 2 monies, which was part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Act, and then to release the ESSER 3 monies as a part of the American Rescue Plan Act. And so at this point, as you stated, we do not include those values in this budget because it is not known, and this legislation has been winding its way at the state level for some time now, and we're uncertain in terms of when it may pass. So as you stated, it is not included in our budget for next year.
Do you have an estimate about what it might be, or do you not? I can understand you not wanting to make any statements, but because it's not worked through yet.
Trustee, I think we're all aware that there continues to be discussion that would dramatically change any numbers that are out there. So I would not venture that guess at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Basket.
Yes, thank you, President Johnson. I just want to caution Trustee Gaynor's request for personnel reports or anything of the such. First of all, we as a board decide the direction of Dr. Swift's work. And so I don't want us to get into a habit of doing individual requests for reports. And this does sound like it's labor intensive. Regarding even the monitoring, again, we have Dr. Swift's roles and we have our roles. And so I want to be very clear that we don't get into that. I'm not sure, Trustee, of which former trustee that you spoke of, but we do know that there have been issues in the past of micromanaging with superintendents in the past with boards, and I hope we do not go down that route. So you are, Trustee, the chair of the Finance Committee, so I'm sure you have privy to numbers and that we don't see on a normal basis, not that it's not public and available to us, but that's not our role as the Finance Committee. So again, President Johnson, I hope we are very careful in the direction that Dr. Swift takes in replying to individual requests for reports and such versus as a board decision. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Trustee Basket. Trustee Gaynor?
Yeah, I understand it's up to the board. I was thinking this is something the board would assume in its monitoring responsibilities of our finances. I have not seen this. I haven't asked for it, to be honest. It occurred to me as I was looking at the numbers today, but I haven't seen those details yet. And so it's a question up to the board of what what level of monitoring we choose to do. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, we absolutely get monthly monitoring reports. I think that the question is about the granularity that we're talking about at this point, and asking for that additional report would provide an additional level of granularity that Trustee Basket's absolutely right. We as a board would want to decide what we need and what's worth the time from a monitoring perspective. So, Dr. Swift, you're about to say something?
We're all good. Thank you. Duly noted. I appreciate the discussion.
Thank you. Chris, any other questions? All right, I actually have a couple questions. So, Ms. Minnick, you talked about the ESSER 2 funds and then the ESSER 3 funds that we're waiting for. And can you all hear me? I guess my audio's breaking up. At least Mike's telling me that. Everybody can hear me? Okay, great. So the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds, you mentioned that we were waiting for them to be released. Also on slide 7 of the first budget report, you noted some COVID-19 support reimbursements under the expenditures. I'm wondering if that's the same money. Is that where those funds go? And are we waiting for them? And if so, would that hit us more on the revenue side than on the expenditure side?
Thank you for your question, President Johnson. Your first question regarding ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Yes, the 2021-22 proposed budget only includes the first portion of ESSER 2, the 43.6% that we are aware has been released to date. We have submitted a spending plan, and we are waiting for the finalization of that process to go through. In the House Bill 4421 that Trustee Gaynor was referring to, that is the bill that speaks to the remainder of ESSER 2 and the ESSER 3 monies. And because we are not certain when those will be finalized at the state level, that is the reason why they are not included here. Does that answer your question?
It does to an extent. I'm just wondering on slide 7, I don't know if you need to pull it up, but you have under expenditure highlights that there's COVID-19 support reimbursement TBD. And I'm wondering, is that the placeholder for that money or is it something else?
That slide for the 2020-2021, the amended general fund budget for this current fiscal year, I've indicated that the COVID-19 support reimbursements are to be determined because we want to be sure that we are strategically taking those sources of coronavirus relief funds and the ESSER 1 dollars and any additional COVID monies that may become available this school year, although we're not aware of any. But we want to be sure that we are fully utilizing every dollar of those grant monies and any other funding opportunities that may come about. So it could be in excess of those grant dollars that we are accounting for and assuming, but we will absolutely take full advantage of every grant dollar and be sure that we utilize those associated revenues on the federal grant side. I didn't want to limit the fact that our reimbursements, I suppose I just wanted to demonstrate that whatever grant funding becomes available, then we will absolutely take advantage of that. But I'm not aware of any other federal grants than what I have included in the federal revenue line items.
Got it. And then once you figure out or you strategically apply the grant money that we will get or that's already in hand plus what we will get, then this number on slide 7 would actually go down, meaning that our expenditures would go, well, expenditures would stay the same, but our revenue would go up. So our balance would increase, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And then my other question is on slide, it's the fund balance slide at that 5% for 2021-22.
Mm-hmm. Slide 10, 18.
Slide 18. Yep, slide 18. So I just remember, especially when I came on the board, that we were afraid to fall below kind of that trigger level of fund balance in order, or when we start getting the nasty grants. And I thought it was around 4.5%. Or it was, am I incorrect? I'm trying to think of how close are we getting to that? Is it 5?
The trigger amount is it's 5% of revenues. Yes. Oftentimes.
Okay, so we're getting. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I would just add that oftentimes the percentage of revenues versus the percentage of expenditures, the board policy is around percentage of expenditures, but the trigger language for financial management is around percentage of revenues. So I appreciate your making that distinction. That is why we portray both percentages in our budget reports.
Got it. So the trigger point for percentage of revenues is 5%, and we're projecting we're going to be at 5.1. So we're on the cusp at this point, is what we're saying.
We are on the cusp, yes.
Okay. And so in that case, I mean, I think this budget notwithstanding, we're getting close. So we probably need to really think about what we're doing going forward and tighten the belt. This was really a very difficult year. So I know that we were very, very much just looking at what do we need to do to make sure that everything stayed afloat and we were able to provide the best education for kids, et cetera. But I just want to warn the board more broadly, as we're looking at spending more money, we are getting very close to that fund balance trigger where, we risk financial managers stepping in or not stepping in, but at least having to give more detailed reporting on the money that we're spending, et cetera.
Yes, there's some additional reporting that would be required. And I do want to point out, for next fiscal year, for the 2021-2022 proposed budget, the assumptions that we are making are based on the House proposal around foundation and that our enrollment is flat.
Yep.
And so while we are hopeful that based on the consensus revenue estimating conference, it looks like perhaps, but we don't know, we can be hopeful that there may be more funding coming to public schools. We don't know where our enrollment will land. And so it is important to note that this is a plan for our anticipated resources and how we are allocating those anticipated resources. And it's unfortunate that it is in advance of the state's fiscal year. It is in advance of knowing these revenue factors from the state level. So we will continue to monitor those changes or any developments and keep you informed of those so that we can make any adjustments as necessary as they come about.
Thank you. And I appreciate you saying without saying it's a conservative estimate. So we appreciate that. We're not counting any chickens before they hatch, but that we're feel like there might be some chickens hatching. So that's good. I do appreciate that. Trustee Basquette. And sorry for my audio. I might turn my camera off if it's breaking up, but Trustee Basquette.
Thank you, President Johnson. And it's worth repeating, although the state take it away as well. Again, those without long institutional memory or those who haven't been following school finance, it is not unusual for the state to give and in January, take it back. And again, we were fortunate enough because of our conservative budgeting and the fact that we had a fund balance that in January, when that did happen, in a January, not this past January, we were able to weather the storm, so to speak, and not lay off staff and dramatically impact programs like other districts. So again, it behooves us to be conservative and mindful because we don't know what the state will do at any point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Basquette. Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much.